The humid air in the velvet note pulsed with the bass line, thick with the scent of stale beer and ambition. Hannah Sterling stood bathed in the single spotlight, her small frame vibrant against the dark stage. Her fingers danced across the guitar strings, a melody both haunting and hopeful blooming from her touch. Then her voice rose, a raw, powerful instrument that soared above the din, each note a testament to battles fought and won. For years, silence had been her cage, a trauma-induced prison she'd thought she'd never escape. Now, the sound that poured from her lungs was pure, unfettered freedom. She closed her eyes, letting the music carry her, feeling the fragile triumph bloom in her chest. This was her life now, a patchwork of smoky clubs and late-night songwriting sessions. But beneath the exhilaration, a cold, persistent tremor vibrated deep within her, a secret terror, always lurking, always reminding her that the shadows of her past, the people who had once stolen her voice, might still be out there. The thought was a phantom hand tightening around her throat, even as her voice reached its crescendo. When the last chord faded, the applause was a roaring wave, washing over her, almost drowning out the lingering fear. Her manager, Leo, a man whose enthusiasm bordered on frantic, was already by her side as she stepped off stage, his eyes alight. "Hannah, that was incredible. The TV competition people are definitely interested after tonight. This is it. You're going to be a star." A star. The word tasted sweet, but also brought a chilling premonition. Stardom meant visibility, visibility meant exposure, and exposure meant the possibility of those shadows finding her again. She nodded, offering a weak smile, her gaze drifting to the exit, half expecting to see a ghost from a life she'd buried. Miles away, in the hushed, sterile opulence of his Manhattan penthouse, Oliver Blackwood sat before a wall of glowing screens. His world was glass and steel, sharp angles and colder truths. On one of those screens, a grainy, slightly delayed video feed played. It was Hannah, singing, her voice carrying an unmistakable resonance even through the digital distortion. Her face, older now, etched with a new strength, was still the face that haunted his coldest nights. A muscle ticked in Oliver's jaw. A cold fury, long dormant, began to stir in his chest, a predator's instinct reawakening. Her voice, once lost to him, was now out in the world, a beacon drawing all the wrong attention. A new report displayed discreetly on an adjacent screen confirmed his worst fears. Her rising visibility, her sudden link to his past in the whispers of the underworld, had made her a target. The criminal syndicates he battled daily, the ones whose tendrils reached into every dark corner of the city, were starting to see her as a valuable pawn. He watched her on the screen, her small form radiating an innocent defiance, utterly unaware of the storm brewing around her. The incident was brewing, a dangerous nexus of his enemies and her newfound fame. Her voice, the very thing that had brought her back to life, had inadvertently marked her. Oliver's gaze hardened, his features settling into a chilling calm. He had let her go once, under duress that still haunted him. He would not make that mistake again. He would not lose her, not to the shadows, not to anyone. The game had changed, and he was about to remind the world exactly who held all the power. The stage lights of the TV competition were blinding, a glorious inferno that Hannah embraced. Her heart hammered with a rhythm that matched the soaring melody she poured into the silver microphone. This was it, the biggest moment of her life. Her voice, strong and clear, filled the vast studio, carrying her song of resilience and hope to millions. Every note was a victory, a defiant shout against the silence that had once defined her. A fragile, exhilarating freedom pulsed through her veins, making her feel invincible. The applause, when it came, was a tsunami of sound, washing away years of doubt and fear. She bowed, breathless, tears pricking her eyes, a triumphant smile lighting her face. Then, as the host stepped forward, beaming, A digital banner unfurled across the screen behind them, meant to celebrate her success. But it wasn't her name or song title that flashed. It was a tabloid headline, stark and accusatory, overlaid with a grainy, outdated picture of her. The rising star's secret past, billionaire Oliver Blackwood's mysterious mute ex-wife. The air left Hannah's lungs in a silent gasp. The world tilted. The joyous roar of the crowd morphed into a distant echo, replaced by a sudden, sickening dread. Her past, the one she had painstakingly buried, was now splashed across national television. Mute, ex-wife. The words were a brand, searing hot. The fragile triumph shattered, replaced by the chilling certainty that the shadows she feared had found her. She felt exposed, utterly vulnerable, under the harsh glare of a spotlight that had suddenly turned hostile. Miles away, in the cool, isolated expanse of his penthouse, Oliver Blackwood watched the broadcast. His features, already carved from granite, hardened further as the headline flashed. He knew the implications instantly. This wasn't just gossip, it was a death sentence in the dangerous world he inhabited. His enemies would see her as a weakness, a lever to manipulate him. The cold calm that usually governed his actions was now laced with an icy, possessive fury. He had protected her from afar for years, but now the game had changed. He would not wait for permission. The next morning, the world was a blur of frantic calls and hushed whispers. Hannah, still reeling from the previous night's public humiliation, was summoned to a meeting at her record label's opulent, sterile headquarters. Her manager, Leo, looked pale and agitated, avoiding her gaze. Before she could even ask for an explanation, the doors swung open and Oliver Blackwood entered. He filled the room. He didn't just walk in, he consumed the space, his presence an unyielding force that bent the air around him. Taller than she remembered, broader, his dark suit accentuating the formidable power that radiated from him like a palpable heat. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept over her, cold and assessing, lingering for a moment before he settled into the chair at the head of the polished conference table. He didn't offer a greeting. He simply was. Hannah felt impossibly small, her throat tightening. The years melted away, and she was once again the young, mute woman standing before the man who had divorced her with a cold, almost surgical precision. The pain of that memory was a sharp ache in her chest, but it was overshadowed by a primal fear, a visceral recognition of the sheer, overwhelming power he wielded. "Hannah," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room, through her bones, demanding attention, demanding obedience. "You are under my protection now." He didn't ask, he declared. His gaze was unwavering, piercing. "I've acquired your label. Effective immediately, you will be moving into my penthouse. There will be no arguments." The words hung in the air, absolute and unyielding. Her mind screamed in protest, fueled by the bitter memories of abandonment, by the loss of control. But her body, inexplicably, felt a strange, terrifying sense of inevitability. His command was not a suggestion, it was an order, delivered with an authority that left no room for defiance. She wanted to rage, to fight, to demand her freedom, but the sheer force of his will, the unyielding promise of his protection, however unwelcome, created a sudden, magnetic pull. She looked into his formidable eyes, seeing not just the man who had broken her heart, but the dangerous, all-consuming protector who stood between her and the unnamed threats now circling. A shiver ran down her spine, a mix of fear and a dawning, unsettling comfort. His power was terrifying, but for the first time since seeing that headline, she felt a strange, undeniable whisper of safety. She could not refuse him. She knew it, and he knew it too. The sleek, armored car glided through the bustling New York streets, a silent cocoon separating Hannah from the world outside. Her small suitcase, the only remnant of her former life, sat beside her. The journey felt surreal, a forced march into a gilded cage. When they finally pulled up to Oliver Blackwood's Manhattan penthouse, her breath hitched. It wasn't just an apartment, it was an entire glass tower reaching into the clouds, reflecting the city's endless glitter. A silent, imposing security guard opened the door, ushering her into an elevator that seemed to ascend endlessly. The doors opened directly into a vast, breathtaking space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Times Square, a dazzling tapestry of neon and light. The scale of it was overwhelming, a stark, dizzying contrast to the cramped apartment she'd left behind. In the center of the living area, bathed in the glow of the city, sat a grand piano, its polished surface gleaming like a dark mirror. It was beautiful, impossible, and utterly isolating. Oliver was already there, standing by the window, his back to her. He didn't turn immediately, a silent testament to his control, to the fact that he expected her presence without needing to acknowledge it. When he finally did, his gaze was as sharp and unyielding as the city skyline. "Your rooms are prepared," he stated, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to fill the expansive space, making it feel smaller, more intimate, more his. "A full security detail will be assigned to you around the clock. Your schedule, all appearances, public or private, will be vetted and approved by my team. You will not leave the penthouse without explicit permission and accompaniment." Hannah felt a cold wave of indignation wash over her. It wasn't just a gilded cage, it was a prison. Her independence, hard-won and fiercely cherished, was being stripped away with every calm, authoritative word. She opened her mouth to protest, but he cut her off with a subtle lift of his hand, a gesture that commanded silence without a single sound. "This is not a negotiation, Hannah," he continued, his eyes piercing her, leaving no room for argument. "This is for your safety. My enemies are watching. You are now inextricably linked to me, and that makes you a target." The word target sent a shiver through her, momentarily silencing her rebellious spirit. She knew he wasn't lying about the danger. The tabloid headline had been proof enough. But the sheer audacity of his control, after years of silence and abandonment, fueled a simmering anger. "My safety," she finally managed, her voice trembling slightly, but rising with a defiant edge. "You divorced me. You cast me aside. Now you think you have the right to dictate my entire life, to imprison me in this palace." She gestured around the opulent room, her hand shaking. "You don't get to abandon me and then claim ownership." Oliver's expression remained unreadable, his face a mask of stoic resolve. He took a slow step towards her, and the sheer force of his presence seemed to amplify, pressing down on her, making it harder to breathe, harder to hold on to her anger. He was so much larger than her, so much more formidable, a force of nature she couldn't hope to contend with. "My reasons for the divorce were complex," he said, his voice dropping to a lower, more dangerous register. "Reasons you cannot begin to comprehend, designed to keep you safe even then. I never stopped watching you, Hannah, never stopped protecting you from afar. But now, that is no longer enough." He didn't reveal specifics, but the intensity in his eyes, the underlying current of something akin to pain beneath his cold exterior, hinted at a truth far more devastating than she imagined. He was telling her that he had been there all along, a silent, unseen guardian, even when she felt most alone. Hannah wanted to scream, to lash out at him for the years of pain, for the sudden, suffocating control. But the sheer, undeniable power radiating from him, the unwavering certainty in his voice, slowly crushed her resistance. She looked into his formidable eyes and saw not just a man dictating her life, but a force that would move mountains or tear them down to keep her from harm. It was terrifying, yes, but beneath the fear, an unsettling, undeniable sense of safety began to bloom. She hated the feeling, hated the way her body seemed to instinctively relax, to concede, but she couldn't deny it. His authority, unwelcome as it was, felt like an unbreachable shield. For now, she had no choice but to concede. She was here, in his world, surrounded by luxury and his watchful gaze, a captive queen in a gilded cage. And for the first time in days, despite everything, the crushing weight of fear began to lift, replaced by the heavy, complicated comfort of his absolute control. The vast penthouse, with its endless views and gleaming surfaces, had become Hannah's gilded cage. Days bled into one another, marked by the rigid structure Oliver imposed. Her initial defiance had slowly, reluctantly given way to a grudging adjustment. She chafed under the constant surveillance, the ever-present security detail that shadowed her every move, even within the confines of the luxurious apartment. Every professional call, every email, every potential public appearance was vetted, scrutinized, and often denied by Oliver's team with an impersonal efficiency that left no room for appeal. Her freedom, the very thing she'd fought so hard to reclaim with her voice, felt like a distant memory. Yet amidst the suffocating control, Hannah began to notice things, small, almost imperceptible details that chipped away at her ingrained anger. One morning, she wandered into a previously locked wing of the penthouse to discover a soundproofed, state-of-the-art recording studio, complete with every piece of equipment a singer-songwriter could dream of. A gift, she realized, though Oliver had never mentioned it. On the grand piano in the living area, a pair of premium noise-cancelling headphones, exactly like the ones she'd lost, appeared. Her favorite obscure blend of herbal tea, which she'd only mentioned once in passing to a staff member, was suddenly stocked in the gleaming kitchen. Oliver himself remained a distant, formidable figure, often cloistered in his private office, but his presence was a constant heavy weight in the air. She would often see him on video calls, his voice a low, commanding rumble as he directed his security team. He oversaw every detail, from the digital firewalls protecting her online presence to the patrol routes of his guards. His authority was absolute, undeniable. And as she watched him, she couldn't help but feel a strange, unsettling truth settle within her. His demanding control, however restrictive, brought with it an undeniable, almost intoxicating sense of safety. One afternoon, a subtle alarm blared softly from a console in the living room, a sound so discreet Hannah almost missed it. Oliver, emerging from his office, moved with a sudden, predatory grace. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show a flicker of panic. Instead, he simply pointed to a screen displaying a diagram of the building, his jaw tight. "Perimeter breach, Sector Gamma, apprehend." Hannah watched, mesmerized and terrified, as his commands were relayed with chilling speed. His eyes, usually cold and unreadable, held a terrifying intensity as he watched the digital map. Within moments, she heard muffled footsteps outside, a brief, sharp scuffle, and then silence. A security guard reported back, "Threat neutralized, Mr. Blackwood. Unauthorized drone attempting aerial surveillance." Oliver simply nodded, his features unyielding. The incident, though minor, was a stark reminder of the unseen dangers that constantly circled. His ruthlessness, the cold, efficient way he handled the threat, sent a shiver down Hannah's spine. It was a terrifying display of power, a glimpse into the formidable, dangerous world he inhabited and the even more dangerous man he was. But that shiver was quickly followed by a strange, almost shameful sense of reassurance. Her initial anger, the burning resentment against his control, began to mix with a grudging respect. She saw now that his methods, however harsh, however suffocating, were not arbitrary. They were necessary. They were keeping her safe from an unseen, relentless enemy. He wasn't just a rich man playing at protection. He was a warrior, and she was under his shield. The weight of her confinement remained, but it no longer felt entirely like a punishment. Instead, it was becoming a heavy, complicated comfort. In the vast, silent penthouse, surrounded by his absolute authority, Hannah found herself slowly, unsettlingly, finding peace. She might not be free in the way she once was, but she was alive and she was safe. That quiet, unsettling comfort, born from the depths of his formidable control, began to settle deep within her, a new, complex anchor in her storm-tossed life. The quiet hum of the penthouse became a constant companion, but it couldn't silence the restless whispers in Hannah's mind. The comfort of Oliver's overwhelming protection, while undeniable, was always laced with the bitter tang of their past. She was safe, yes, but at what cost? The ghost of their divorce, the searing pain of his abandonment, still haunted her, a phantom ache in her chest. She couldn't reconcile the ruthless protector with the man who had so coldly cast her aside. The questions churned within her, demanding answers, even if they shattered the fragile peace she'd found. One evening, she found Oliver in his private study, a vast room of dark wood and leather, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. He was immersed in documents, his powerful frame utterly still, radiating an intensity that made the air crackle. Hannah hesitated at the threshold, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Approaching him felt like stepping into the path of a silent, formidable storm. But she couldn't retreat. "Oliver," she began, her voice softer than she intended, feeling impossibly small in the cavernous room. He didn't look up immediately, a subtle exercise of his dominance, reminding her of his absolute focus. Then, slowly, he raised his head, his dark eyes meeting hers, unreadable as always. "Hannah," he acknowledged, his voice a low, steady current that seemed to flow directly into her, demanding attention. "The divorce," she blurted, unable to hold back any longer, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "Why? After everything, after the years we had, how could you just let me go?" The words were laced with pain and confusion, tearing at the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart. His gaze remained steady, unwavering, but something flickered deep within their depths, a shadow of regret, a hint of steel. He leaned back in his chair, his posture still controlled, but the sheer force of his presence seemed to expand, filling the room, pressing down on her. "My family's pressure was pervasive," he finally said, his voice carefully measured, each word chosen with precision. "More insidious than you could ever imagine. My mother in particular was relentless. She pulled strings, invoked clauses, threatened consequences that would have destroyed you, Hannah. Consequences far worse than a divorce." He avoided specifics, but the unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. His mother had wielded a power so absolute, so terrifying, that Oliver had been forced into an agonizing choice. Hannah stared at him, stunned. His words painted a picture she'd never conceived, a hidden war fought behind closed doors, a sacrifice she hadn't known he made. His steady gaze, though still guarded, was filled with a complex mix of regret and an unwavering, almost desperate determination. It wasn't the cold, dismissive look of a man who didn't care. It was the gaze of a man who had been forced to make an impossible decision, a decision that still haunted him. Before she could process this new, unsettling truth, Oliver pushed a sleek tablet across the polished desk towards her. "The danger is real, Hannah, and it's escalating." On the screen were anonymous emails, chillingly vague social media posts, all subtly targeting her, linking her to Oliver, hinting at her value as leverage. A cold dread seeped into her bones. The threats were no longer abstract, they were concrete, palpable, closing in. "This is just the surface," Oliver's voice rumbled, pulling her gaze back to him. They've been watching you for a long time, but so have I." He paused, his eyes piercing, demanding her full attention. "For years, I've had eyes on you. Every club gig, every song you wrote. I bankrolled your underground career, Hannah. Every step you took towards reclaiming your voice, I ensured you had the means to do it, anonymously, through shell companies. I protected your art, protected your freedom, while you healed. I never left you unguarded." Hannah felt the air leave her lungs in a silent gasp. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, stripping away every preconceived notion she had held about him. The image of the man who had callously divorced her, the cold billionaire who had abandoned her to her silence, shattered into a million pieces. In its place emerged a terrifying, devoted figure, a hidden architect of her life, a silent, unseen guardian who had always been there, pulling the strings, ensuring her survival, her growth, her very voice. She felt a dizzying mix of emotions, shock, disbelief, a profound sense of betrayal by her own ignorance, and beneath it all a powerful, almost overwhelming surge of something akin to awe. He hadn't just watched, he had orchestrated. He hadn't just cared, he had controlled her path, secretly, dominantly, ensuring she would rise again. His power, which had felt so suffocating, now took on a different dimension. It wasn't just about control, it was about absolute, unwavering protection. He had always been her protector, even when she didn't know it, even when she hated him for what she thought he'd done. The weight of his presence, the deep resonance of his voice, no longer felt like a cage, but an impenetrable fortress. Hannah looked at the powerful, enigmatic man before her, her world shifting on its axis. He was dangerous, terrifying, and utterly, irrevocably devoted to her. And in that moment, despite the shock, despite the lingering pain, she felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. Hannah's mind still reeled from Oliver's confession, the truth of his long, secret protection shattering the image of the cold, abandoning husband. She moved through the vast penthouse, the luxurious space now feeling less like a gilded cage and more like a sophisticated stronghold. The shock of his revelation, the dizzying understanding of his unwavering dominant care, still reverberated through her. The quiet of that newfound understanding was shattered one morning by a series of urgent, low tones emanating from Oliver's private study. He emerged, his face a grim mask, holding a sleek tablet. His presence, usually commanding, now carried an even heavier weight, a palpable sense of focused intensity that brought Hannah to a complete stop in the sprawling living area. "They've made their move," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying an undeniable force that seemed to vibrate through the very air. He didn't offer a detailed explanation, didn't need to. His tone alone conveyed the gravity of the situation. Oliver moved with a predatory grace, his powerful frame a blur of efficiency. He barked commands into a secure comms device, his words a mix of technical jargon and cold, strategic directives that Hannah barely understood. Screens around the penthouse, usually displaying cityscapes or financial news, now flickered with complex data, network diagrams, and rapidly scrolling code. Oliver moved between them, his fingers flying across interfaces, his posture radiating an unyielding command that brooked no argument, no hesitation. He briefly gestured to one screen, displaying a series of encrypted messages. "A sophisticated phishing attempt, targeting your digital footprint," and this, he tapped another section, a veiled threat against Oliver Blackwood's assets, specifically you. Hannah felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. An anonymous encrypted message, displayed for only a second, promised to make him pay through what he holds dearest. Her breath hitched. That was her. She was what he held dearest, in a terrifying, possessive way. She was only just beginning to comprehend. The threat was no longer an abstract fear. It was a tangible, chilling reality. Closing in, Oliver's response was immediate and absolute. The penthouse, already an epitome of security, was transformed into an impenetrable fortress. New biometric scanners appeared at every entrance, sleek and unforgiving. Hidden cameras, previously so discreet as to be invisible, now seemed to subtly assert their presence in every corner. The already formidable security detail doubled, their movements more precise, their presence more pronounced, a silent, watchful legion. Oliver himself oversaw the installations, his eyes missing nothing, his voice a low, commanding force that demanded perfection. He walked the perimeter not physically, but through a series of internal monitors, his gaze sharp, assessing every angle, every potential vulnerability. Hannah watched him, a silent observer to his war. His sheer size, his calm, focused intensity made her feel like a tiny, fragile moth caught in the periphery of a hurricane. The digital attack had been a subtle, unseen enemy, but Oliver's reaction, his cold, calculating efficiency, made the danger palpable. She saw the controlled ferocity in his eyes, the absolute resolve that hardened every line of his powerful frame. He wasn't just reacting, he was waging a war on her behalf, dismantling a threat with the same ruthless precision he applied to his empire. It was terrifying to be the object of such malevolent attention, to be a pawn in such a dangerous game. But watching Oliver, seeing the unyielding determination etched on his face, a different emotion surfaced within her. It wasn't just fear, it was a profound, almost overwhelming sense of protection. The external danger was no longer a theoretical concept, it was a palpable, unseen enemy, and Oliver was the unyielding bulwark against it. His power, once intimidating and suffocating, now felt like the only thing keeping her safe. She understood, with a clarity that both humbled and terrified her, that her vulnerability was absolute, and his strength was her sole shield. Her reliance on him, once a source of bitter resentment, now solidified into an undeniable, fundamental truth. She might not like the feeling of being completely dependent, of being subjected to his absolute will, but in this dangerous new world, she knew, without a doubt, that she was truly safe only when she was under his indomitable protection. The days tightened their grip around Hannah, each passing hour solidifying her confinement. The penthouse, once a symbol of overwhelming luxury, now felt like the very center of the storm, an exquisitely crafted bunker where every exit was guarded, every window an impenetrable shield. Her public appearances, once exhilarating explosions of newfound freedom, were now meticulously orchestrated ballets of security. She moved from one heavily vetted location to another, always surrounded by Oliver's silent, imposing guards, their presence a constant, suffocating reminder of the unseen dangers that circled. She could feel their eyes on her, not just the guards, but the anonymous, malevolent gaze of the syndicate pressing in from the outside world. One afternoon, during a highly secured photo shoot for a major magazine feature, Hannah felt an almost suffocating tension in the air. The studio was a fortress, every entrance manned, every corner swept. Yet, as she stepped back into her dressing room, a small, elegantly folded note lay on her vanity, tucked beneath a bouquet of roses. It hadn't been there moments before. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, her heart leaping into her throat. The paper was expensive, heavy, and the words, written in a stark, elegant script, sent a jolt of ice through her veins. "Your voice may be a weapon Oliver can't control, little bird, but even weapons can be broken." The air in the room seemed to grow thin, stealing her breath. Her voice, the very thing she had fought so hard to reclaim, the source of her triumph and defiance, was now explicitly named as a target, linked directly to Oliver. The message was chillingly personal, a direct threat that had somehow bypassed Oliver's impenetrable security, proving just how deeply they were already entrenched. This wasn't a vague digital threat. This was a physical breach, a whisper in her ear, a cold, intimate reminder of her vulnerability. The scale of the danger, she realized with a sickening lurch, was far greater, far more insidious than she had dared to imagine. They weren't just after Oliver, they were after her. When Oliver found her moments later, she was still holding the note, her knuckles white, her body trembling uncontrollably. His eyes, usually unreadable, instantly darkened, focusing on the paper in her hand, then on the stark fear etched on her face. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. His presence alone was a massive, unyielding force that filled the room, pressing out the chaos that had begun to consume her. He took the note from her, his fingers brushing hers, sending an unexpected jolt through her skin. He read it, his jaw tightening, a cold, dangerous fury simmering beneath his controlled exterior. He didn't offer empty words of comfort, no soft reassurances. Instead, he simply moved closer, his imposing frame blocking out the room, blocking out the world. His hand, large and warm, settled on the small of her back, a possessive, anchoring weight that immediately grounded her. "They won't touch you," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones, through the very floor beneath them. It wasn't a promise, it was an absolute declaration, a dominant command that left no room for doubt or argument. His gaze, fiercely protective, met hers, and in their depths she saw not just the cold, ruthless billionaire, but the unwavering protector, the man who would burn the world down to keep her safe. Despite the lingering fear that still clawed at her throat, Hannah felt an immediate, instinctive pull towards his strength. Her body, without conscious thought, leaned into his touch, seeking the solid, unyielding anchor of his presence. His power, once so terrifying in its suffocating control, now felt like an impenetrable fortress, a shield against the encroaching darkness. She was still afraid, deeply, profoundly afraid. But with his hand on her, with his fierce declaration vibrating through her, she felt an undeniable, almost intoxicating sense of safety. Later, as the security team swarmed the studio searching for answers, Hannah retreated to the grand piano in the penthouse. The polished wood felt cool beneath her fingertips, a familiar comfort in a world that had become utterly alien. She sat, her mind still replaying the chilling words of the note. The image of Oliver's dark, furious eyes burned into her memory. Her fingers, almost of their own accord, began to trace a melody across the keys. It was haunting, mournful, reflecting the fear that still lingered. But beneath the sorrow, a new, powerful current emerged, a complex, soaring harmony that spoke of unyielding strength, of a devotion so profound it bordered on obsession. It was a melody of fear, yes, but also of a deepening, undeniable trust in the man who had claimed her body and soul as his to protect. The air in the grand ballroom shimmered with crystal light and the murmur of polite conversation, a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of the penthouse. Hannah wore a gown of deep emerald, chosen by Oliver's team, its richness a heavy silk armor against the unfamiliar glow of the charity gala. This was a rare public appearance, meticulously planned, every detail of her movement choreographed by an unprecedented security detail that seemed to blend seamlessly into the opulent crowd. She sang a short, poignant set, her voice soaring through the vaulted space, a fragile beauty amidst the surrounding grandeur. The applause was warm, genuine, but beneath it, Hannah felt a persistent hum of unease. Even with Oliver's omnipresent guards, the outside world felt too close, too unguarded. Oliver stood a few feet away, a dark, imposing figure in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his eyes constantly sweeping the room. His presence was a palpable force, a quiet anchor in the swirling chaos of the event. He hadn't touched her since they arrived, but she felt the invisible tether that bound them, a silent communication of his unwavering vigilance. As she moved through a small reception line, offering polite smiles, a prickle of unease intensified. Her gaze snagged on a man in the distance, ostensibly a guest, but something about his movements felt wrong. He was too focused, his eyes too sharp, cutting through the crowd with an unnerving determination. He wasn't looking at the art on the walls or the glittering jewels of the patrons. He was looking at her. A cold dread bloomed in Hannah's chest. The man started to move, not towards the nearest exit or the bar, but directly, purposefully, towards her. He was too fast, too direct, bypassing a discreetly placed bodyguard with a practiced ease that sent a jolt of terror through her. Her breath hitched, her polite smile faltering. She felt suddenly terrifyingly exposed, her small frame utterly vulnerable against the encroaching threat. The hum of the crowd faded, replaced by the pounding of her own heart. Before she could even fully comprehend the danger, Oliver moved. He didn't stride, he surged, a blur of dark power cutting through the space between them. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. His face, usually a mask of stoic control, was now a terrifying tableau of cold, righteous fury, every line hardened into an expression of lethal intent. He was a predator striking, his focus absolute. Hannah watched, mesmerized and terrified, as he intercepted the man. Oliver didn't speak. He simply acted. One large hand clamped down on the man's shoulder, stopping him dead in his tracks. The force was immense, immediate. The man, startled, tried to twist free, but Oliver's grip was unyielding. His eyes, usually pools of dark, unreadable depths, now held a glint of pure, unadulterated danger, a silent promise of violence that sent a shiver down Hannah's spine. It was a look that promised complete obliteration to anyone who dared threaten what was his. Almost instantly, two of Oliver's bodyguards, their faces grim, moved in with practiced efficiency. They apprehended the man, pulling him away with swift, brutal force, disappearing him into a side exit without a word. The entire incident lasted mere seconds, a silent, terrifying ballet of protection and control, unnoticed by most of the oblivious gala attendees. But Hannah had seen it all. She saw the sheer, unbridled power in Oliver's movements, the terrifying resolve in his eyes. She saw his absolute commitment to her safety, his willingness to eliminate any threat, personally, physically, without a moment's hesitation. The adrenaline coursed through her veins, leaving her trembling, her knees weak, but the fear was swiftly followed by a profound, almost overwhelming realization. Oliver was her shield. Her unyielding, formidable shield. His power, which had once felt like a cage, now felt like the only thing standing between her and utter devastation. His ruthlessness, the cold, lethal glint in his eyes, wasn't directed at her. It was for her. It was a promise, unspoken but absolute, that he would protect her from anything, from anyone. She looked at him, his gaze already back on her, sweeping over her as if checking for damage. His expression softened only slightly from its previous fury. He didn't reach for her, didn't need to. Her body, without conscious thought, leaned imperceptibly towards him, seeking the anchor of his overwhelming strength, the unwavering certainty of his presence. The subtle movement was an unconscious submission, an undeniable acknowledgement of her place under his protection. The incident had left her shaken but also utterly irrevocably convinced. There was no argument left in her. She was safe only when she was completely under his command, completely within the sphere of his dominance. The feeling that settled deep within her was a strange, powerful mix of fear and an intoxicating sense of belonging. Her trust in him, once fractured by pain and doubt, was now complete and absolute. She was his to protect, and she had never felt safer. The incident at the gala had solidified Hannah's trust in Oliver, anchoring her to his formidable strength. Yet the quiet moments that followed were still haunted by the unanswered questions of their past, the gaping wound of their divorce. She felt an unsettling peace now, secure within his impenetrable fortress, but the shadow of abandonment still lingered, a phantom ache beneath the comfort of his protection. She knew he had sacrificed for her, protected her, but the full truth of why he had cast her aside remained elusive, a missing piece in the complex puzzle of their lives. One evening, Oliver found her by the grand piano, her fingers idly tracing a melancholy tune. He didn't speak, but his presence, a silent, powerful force, filled the vast space. Hannah felt him before she saw him, the air around her thickening with his familiar intensity. He moved to stand beside the piano, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over her, making her feel small, delicate. In his hand, he held a slim, dark folder. "There are things you need to know, Hannah," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its usual command, yet carrying a profound weight that instantly commanded her full attention. "Things I kept from you to protect you, even then." He opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents. They were official-looking, with hospital letterheads, but heavily redacted, large black boxes obscuring most of the text. Hannah's eyes widened, a cold dread creeping into her stomach. "These are psychiatric reports," Oliver continued, his voice tight, rough around the edges. "Forged by my mother. She used your muteness, your trauma, to paint you as unstable, erratic. She threatened to have you institutionalized, Hannah, committed indefinitely." The word struck her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Institutionalized. The term resonated with a primal terror, a fate worse than any prison. Her muteness, a symptom of her deepest pain, twisted into a weapon against her. She stared at the redacted papers, a sickening horror churning in her gut. She could barely breathe, her mind reeling, trying to process the monstrous cruelty of it. "She gave me an ultimatum," Oliver's voice continued, a low, guttural confession that ripped through the quiet of the penthouse. His eyes, usually cold and unreadable, now burned with a raw, agonizing emotion she'd never seen. "Divorce you, publicly sever all ties, and she would ensure you remained free. To preserve the family's pristine image," as she so coldly put it, "or watch you disappear into an institution, lost forever." Hannah felt a guttural sob tear at her throat, but no sound escaped. It was a silent scream, echoing the years of her muteness, the terror she had lived with. The world tilted on its axis. The man she had hated for his abandonment, the cold billionaire who had cast her aside, had actually made an unimaginable sacrifice. He hadn't just let her go. He had freed her, at the cost of his own heart, at the cost of her pain and his own. The profound betrayal was not from him, but from his own mother, a horrifying, insidious evil that had haunted her life, unknown, for so long. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent, blurring her vision. Her hands trembled, clutching at the smooth wood of the piano. The pain was unbearable, a crushing weight of realization. But it was not anger at Oliver. It was a shattering sorrow for the agonizing choice he had faced, for the depth of his secret sacrifice, for the years of misunderstanding that had separated them. Oliver reached out, his large hand, so capable, so dominant, gently cupping her wet cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear, a feather-light touch that sent a tremor through her. His eyes, burning with a complex mix of regret, fury, and a fierce, possessive love, held hers. "I am so sorry, Hannah," he rasped, his voice rough with an emotion that stripped away all his usual control. It was the most vulnerable she had ever heard him, a profound confession of deep regret, of a love that had driven him to an unthinkable act. "I should have told you. I should have found another way." His apology wasn't a plea. It was a profound declaration, a silent groveling of a man who had faced an impossible choice and lived with the consequences, alone. The power radiating from him was still immense, but now it was softened, layered with a pain that mirrored her own. His presence, usually a testament to his absolute control, was now a comforting, solid anchor in the storm of her emotions. Hannah leaned into his touch, her body instinctively seeking solace in his strength. The truth had torn her apart, but in its wake, an even deeper, more profound sense of safety bloomed. He had protected her then, and he was protecting her now. His dominance was not a cage, it was a shield, forged in sacrifice, wielded by a love so fierce, so absolute, it defied comprehension. In that moment, surrounded by his powerful presence, her cheek cradled in his hand, Hannah felt a peace unlike any she had ever known. She was utterly broken by the truth, but irrevocably safe, cherished, and finally, completely understood by the man who had secretly loved her all along. The raw, agonizing truth of Oliver's sacrifice still resonated through Hannah, a wound that had healed into a profound, complicated understanding. The man who had once been her cold betrayer was now revealed as her silent, suffering protector, a figure of such overwhelming dominant strength that her world had irrevocably shifted. The penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded captivity, now felt like the safest place on earth, a fortress built around her by a love so fierce it bordered on terrifying. But even within that fortress, the world outside pressed in. The syndicate, cornered and increasingly desperate, escalated their attacks, their shadowy presence growing bolder, more aggressive. Hannah sensed the shift in the air, in the subtle tightening of Oliver's jaw, in the increased vigilance of the omnipresent security detail. The quiet hum of the penthouse was now punctuated by hushed, urgent conversations among Oliver's team, their voices low and tense. One afternoon, Oliver summoned her to his study. The room, usually a sanctuary of his own fierce control, felt charged with a new, dangerous energy. He stood before his wall of screens, his back to her, his powerful shoulders hunched slightly, radiating a suppressed fury that made the air crackle. When he finally turned, his eyes, usually unreadable, were colder than winter ice, yet burned with an incandescent rage that was almost frightening in its intensity. "They're making their move," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate with controlled violence. He gestured to a screen, displaying a complex web of intercepted communications. "We've uncovered their full plan. They intend to kidnap you, use you as leverage against me." Hannah felt a cold dread seize her, tightening its icy grip around her heart. Kidnap. The word was a primal terror, far more terrifying than any veiled threat. Her breath hitched, her eyes wide with fear, scanning the ominous data on the screens. "And we found the leak," Oliver continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, each word a hammer blow. "The source of their intelligence, your tour schedule, your security arrangements, information that only an insider could possess." He paused, his gaze, sharp and unforgiving, impaling her. "It's Leo." The name hit Hannah like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Leo, her manager, her friend. The man who had discovered her, who had championed her, who had been her rock in the bewildering world of music, the man she had trusted implicitly, seen as surrogate family. He was the serpent in her garden, selling her out for a cut of a future ransom. A wave of nausea washed over her, a sickening sensation of betrayal that far eclipsed the fear of the syndicate itself. Leo. The kind smiles, the enthusiastic encouragement, the seemingly unwavering support, all of it had been a lie, a carefully constructed facade. Her world, which had just begun to right itself after Oliver's confession, now splintered again, shattering into a million pieces. The one person she had allowed herself to rely on, outside of Oliver's demanding sphere, had been orchestrating her downfall. Hannah stumbled back, clutching at her chest, a silent cry tearing at her throat. The pain of this betrayal was profound, deeper even than the fear of the impending danger. It stripped away any remaining illusions of her independent control, any belief that she could navigate this treacherous world on her own. She had been so foolish, so naive. The world was a dangerous place, and she, alone, was utterly vulnerable. Oliver was there in an instant, moving with a predator's swiftness. His large hands, firm and possessive, settled on her shoulders, anchoring her, pulling her against his solid, unyielding frame. His strength was absolute, an impenetrable wall against the crumbling of her world. His gaze, still burning with a dangerous fury, was now solely focused on her, on reassuring her, on commanding her fear into submission. "He will pay," Oliver growled, his voice a low, guttural promise of retribution that sent a shiver down Hannah's spine, a mix of terror and a strange, dark satisfaction. "No one touches what's mine." The possessiveness in his tone, the sheer, undeniable force of his presence was overwhelming. She was his, and he would destroy anyone who dared to threaten her. In that moment of utter devastation, of profound betrayal, Hannah found herself clinging to him, her hands fisted in his expensive suit jacket. Her world had narrowed, shrunk to the powerful protective sphere of Oliver Blackwood. He was all that remained, her only anchor, her only truth. His strength was her refuge, his dominance her shield. She might have lost everything else, but she was irrevocably, absolutely safe in his terrifying, unyielding embrace. Hannah still felt the sickening churn of betrayal from Leo's treachery. The man she had trusted had been a viper, selling her life for profit. The revelation had stripped away her last vestiges of independent spirit, leaving her raw, exposed, and utterly reliant on Oliver. Her world was now entirely defined by his formidable presence, his unwavering will. Her fear of the syndicate, once abstract, was now terrifyingly concrete, embodied by the man who had pretended to be her friend. Oliver, however, was no longer merely a protector. The news of Leo's betrayal, coupled with the syndicate's escalating threats, had ignited a cold, righteous rage within him. Hannah saw it in the granite set of his jaw, the terrifying stillness in his eyes that promised swift, merciless retribution. He was a force unleashed, a storm of devastating power directed entirely at her enemies, a predator who had finally been pushed too far. The penthouse, already a fortress, transformed into Oliver's war room. Screens that once displayed financial markets now pulsed with intelligence reports, network diagrams, and encrypted communications. Oliver moved through this complex web with chilling precision, his voice a low, commanding rumble as he orchestrated his counteroffensive. He spent hours on secure lines, his words crisp, ruthless. Hannah would overhear snippets. Freeze their offshore assets, expose the shell companies, disrupt their logistics in Geneva. He was dismantling their operations, piece by piece, crippling their financial lifelines, exposing their dirty dealings to authorities without a single tremor of hesitation. He moved with the focused intensity of a man who would burn the world down to protect what was his. Hannah watched him, a silent witness to his silent war. The sheer scale of his power was breathtaking, terrifying. He wasn't just defending, he was obliterating. His focus was absolute, his grim determination etched into every line of his face. He barely ate, barely slept, his entire being consumed by the fight to keep her safe. The pressure he was under was immense, a crushing weight that would break lesser men. But Oliver bore it with an unyielding strength that only deepened Hannah's awe. He was a titan, battling shadows in a world she could barely comprehend, all for her. The thought that such devastating power was wielded solely in her defense sent a shiver through her, a complex mix of fear and an intoxicating sense of being utterly cherished. She couldn't fight his war, not with money or brute force, but she found a different role, a quiet purpose in the maelstrom. She became his emotional anchor. In the rare moments when he would pause, leaning against a doorframe, his eyes distant, shadowed with the weight of his burden, She would approach him. She didn't speak, didn't offer advice he didn't need. Instead, she would simply take his hand, her small fingers curling around his large, powerful ones. Sometimes she would just stand beside him, a comforting presence, her quiet strength a subtle counterpoint to his devastating power. She was the calm in his storm, the sole focus of his immense, dangerous will. He would look at her, his eyes softening almost imperceptibly, and in that gaze she knew she was his most precious possession. She followed his instructions without question, her trust unwavering. When he told her to stay in her room, she did. When he allowed a brief, heavily guarded walk on the terrace, she accepted it without complaint. Every action, every command he issued, she knew, was for her safety. His power was absolute, and her submission, though born of necessity, was becoming a source of quiet strength for them both, a silent pact forged in the heart of his war. Retreating to the grand piano, Hannah found solace in its cool, familiar keys. The melodies that emerged were no longer just about her past trauma or newfound freedom. They were about him. A powerful ballad began to form, a haunting, soaring tribute to unwavering loyalty and devotion. It spoke of sacrifice, of a love that protected fiercely, violently if necessary. Each note was a testament to the silent war he waged, a song for the man who had claimed her, broken her world, and then painstakingly rebuilt it around himself, making her irrevocably, absolutely safe. Her voice, once lost, now sang his story, a melody of his formidable, unyielding love. The world outside the penthouse, already a blur of danger, exploded into a maelstrom of media frenzy. Tabloid headlines, screaming from every digital screen and newsstand, painted Hannah in the cruelest light. "Blackwood's gold digger!" one blared, while another accused her of being the billionaire's accomplice, dark secrets behind her sweet voice. Half-truths, twisted facts, and outright fabrications spun a web of scandal around her, threatening to unravel everything she had fought to build. Hannah felt a deep, sickening lurch in her stomach as she watched the relentless onslaught. Her fragile public image, her carefully constructed persona of a resilient artist, crumbled under the weight of the accusations. The syndicate, cornered and desperate from Oliver's relentless assault, had struck at her most vulnerable point, her reputation, her very identity. She felt exposed, tainted, a pawn in a game far too ruthless for her to comprehend. The world, it seemed, was determined to tear her down, and she felt impossibly small against its fury. Oliver, however, remained a granite wall against the onslaught. He moved through the penthouse, his presence a silent, formidable force that seemed to absorb the external chaos. Hannah watched him, mesmerized by his unwavering control. He sat before his screens, his voice a low, commanding rumble as he orchestrated a masterful media counter-strategy. He didn't explain the intricacies, didn't need to. Hannah simply understood that he was fighting for her, dismantling the accusations with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to the syndicate itself. His primary concern, she knew, wasn't his own reputation, but hers. He ensured that her name, her image, was protected, even as the storm raged. He promised her it would all be over soon, his voice a deep, resonant certainty that cut through the cacophony of the outside world. His demanding protection, already intense, now felt like an unyielding embrace, a total claiming. He would look at her, his dark eyes radiating an unspoken vow. She was his, and he would burn the world down to keep her safe. His every command, every subtle gesture, was a reinforcement of that promise. Hannah found herself clinging to his presence, drawing strength from his unwavering power. The public humiliation, the venomous accusations still stung, but with Oliver by her side, a towering, unshakable figure, she felt an undeniable, profound safety. His dominance wasn't a burden. It was a shield, an absolute protection that swallowed her fear, replacing it with a quiet, undeniable peace. She submitted to his will without question, knowing that in his hands In his impenetrable world, she was truly untouchable. The air backstage hummed with an almost unbearable tension, a frantic symphony of hurried footsteps, hushed stage directions, and the distant roar of the live audience. Tonight was the TV finale, the culmination of everything Hannah had fought for, the biggest night of her life. She stood in her dressing room, the silver microphone cool and heavy in her hand, its weight a familiar comfort. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a mix of exhilarating anticipation and a deep, unsettling fear. She knew this was their most vulnerable moment, the stage set not just for her performance, but for the syndicate's final desperate move. Oliver had made that clear, his gaze grim, his commands sharper than ever. Even with the controlled chaos surrounding her, Hannah felt Oliver's presence like a physical force. He was out there, moving through the bustling corridors, his formidable presence a silent sentinel. She had seen him earlier, impeccably dressed in a dark tuxedo, a stark contrast to the casual crew, yet he moved among them like a shadow, his eyes scanning every face, every corner, missing nothing. He hadn't spoken much, but his hand had briefly settled on her arm as she entered her dressing room, a silent, possessive gesture that both commanded and reassured. She was his to protect, and he was taking no chances. A knock, light and deferential, interrupted her thoughts. It was one of Oliver's personal security detail, a tall, silent woman who had been her shadow for weeks. 5 minutes, Miss Sterling. Hannah nodded, taking a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She met the guard's eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the danger that lay just beyond the thin walls of her sanctuary. In the past, she might have bristled at the constant surveillance, but now it was a lifeline. The moments stretched, each second thrumming with anticipation. Hannah closed her eyes, picturing Oliver, his unyielding strength, his absolute control. It was his dominance that carved out this fragile bubble of safety for her, and she clung to it, to him, with an almost desperate intensity. She was ready, ready to sing, ready to face whatever came. A sudden, jarring noise ripped through the quiet of her dressing room. Not the distant roar of the crowd, but a sharp, metallic clang from the hallway, followed by a muffled shout. Hannah's eyes snapped open, a cold dread seizing her. This wasn't part of the controlled chaos. This was wrong. Her security guard, already poised, moved towards the door, her hand instinctively going to her earpiece. Before she could speak, the door to the dressing room burst inward with a splintering crash. The sudden violence of it made Hannah gasp, stumbling back. 3 men, bulky and menacing, stormed into the room. They weren't stage crew. Their faces were hard, their eyes devoid of emotion, and they moved with a brutal efficiency that spoke of training. One of them held a crude but undeniably real firearm. Terror, cold and absolute, gripped Hannah. Her heart leaped into her throat, stealing her breath. The security guard, though swift, was overwhelmed in an instant, taken down with a sickening thud. Hannah felt impossibly small, utterly helpless, her silver microphone suddenly a useless weight in her hand. The men were here for her, the syndicate. They had breached the fortress. "Grab her!" a harsh voice commanded, cutting through the ringing in Hannah's ears. 2 of the men lunged, their hands reaching for her. Her mind screamed, but no sound escaped. She stumbled backward, desperately trying to evade their grasp, her legs heavy with fear. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape, for a shield, for him. Where was Oliver? The panic was a suffocating shroud, stealing her ability to think, to move. Through the terror, a chilling realization pierced her. This wasn't just a random attack. This was precise, this was orchestrated, and then a fleeting, horrifying image flashed through her mind. Leo, her manager, the viper in the garden. He had been backstage, moving freely, his familiarity a key to unlock the very defenses Oliver had built around her. He had given them the signal. The betrayal was complete. A hand, rough and strong, clamped around her arm, pulling her forward, yanking her towards the shattered doorway, towards the unseen waiting van. Another man grabbed her waist, lifting her, dragging her. The hallway outside was a blur of chaos, more shouts, frantic screams, the metallic tang of fear. She was being hauled away, a helpless prize, a pawn in a game far beyond her control. Her world spun, collapsing around her, leaving her utterly exposed, utterly vulnerable. But even as terror threatened to consume her, a tiny, desperate part of her mind cried out for one name, one presence: Oliver. His power, his dominance, his absolute control. She needed him. Now. The rough hands dragged Hannah relentlessly towards the shattered doorway, the cold night air rushing in, promising the horror of the waiting van. Her mind screamed, a silent, desperate plea. Her body limp with terror. She was a prize, an object, her fate sealed. Then a blur of dark, formidable power erupted from the chaos. Oliver. He didn't walk. He launched himself. One moment the men were pulling her, the next a wall of tailored black suit and raw, unadulterated fury materialized between them. He moved with a terrifying speed and precision that defied his imposing size. His first strike was a brutal, swift blow to the jaw of the man holding her arm, a sickening crunch that echoed in the sudden, stunned silence. The man crumpled, a dead weight. The other assailant, momentarily frozen, barely registered the danger before Oliver spun, his large hand a vice around the man's wrist, twisting, snapping. A cry of pain abruptly cut short. He wasn't just fighting, he was a whirlwind of calculated violence, a predator unleashed. Hannah watched, mesmerized and terrified, as her world exploded into a ballet of brutal efficiency. This wasn't the cold billionaire she knew from boardrooms. This was a man forged in the shadows, lethal and absolute. One of the men, the one with the gun, finally reacted, bringing the firearm up. But Oliver was faster, impossibly so. He moved with the fluid grace of a trained killer, disarming the man with a brutal efficiency that made Hannah gasp. The gun clattered to the floor, then was swiftly snatched up by Oliver's own hand. His eyes, fixed on the remaining threats, were pools of cold, lethal fury, utterly devoid of mercy. He fired once, a deafening crack that made Hannah flinch, pressing her hands over her ears. The sound was deafening, primal. A man stumbled, clutching his shoulder, his face contorted in pain. Oliver didn't hesitate. His focus absolute, his body a shield, pulling Hannah down, covering her behind an overturned equipment crate. She felt the heavy weight of him against her back, his sheer size an unyielding fortress, his warmth a strange, terrifying comfort amidst the chaos. He was bleeding, she realized, a dark stain blossoming on the pristine white of his shirt where his arm was pressed against her, but he gave no sign of pain. His attention solely on the remaining threats. From her vantage point, hidden behind his formidable frame, Hannah watched as Oliver methodically eliminated the remaining attackers. He moved with a ruthless efficiency, breaking noses, disarming, incapacitating. His face, when she caught glimpses of it, was a mask of cold, lethal fury, every line etched with an unwavering, possessive focus on her safety. He wasn't just protecting her, he was eradicating anything that dared to stand between them. The sheer, overwhelming power he wielded was terrifying, but beneath the terror, a profound primal sense of safety bloomed, swallowing her fear. She was utterly safe behind him, shielded by his violence, his absolute will. Finally, a rush of heavy footsteps, and the remaining security detail, now fully engaged, swarmed the area. Sirens wailed in the distance. The immediate threat was neutralized, the attackers subdued, their bodies littering the hallway like discarded puppets. One of Oliver's lead guards, a grim-faced woman, rushed to them, her eyes wide with concern. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Sterling, are you all right?" she asked, her voice tight. She glanced at Oliver's bleeding arm. "We need to get you both out of here. There's a discreet exit. We can get Ms. Sterling to a safe house. Finish the show elsewhere, or just get her away from here entirely." Hannah heard the words, the offer of escape, of retreat, of a chance to simply disappear. But her eyes were fixed on Oliver. He was bruised, his tux disheveled, a trickle of blood drying on his temple. Yet he stood victorious, his chest heaving slightly, his eyes still fiercely protective, sweeping over her, checking her for any injury. His gaze was intense, possessive, demanding her presence. In that moment, everything became clear. The fear, the betrayal, the years of misunderstanding, the crushing weight of his protection. He had literally put his body, his life, between her and destruction. He had fought, bled, and killed for her. He was her protector, her shield, her everything. And she was irrevocably, absolutely his. She didn't hesitate. She pushed herself up from behind the crate, ignoring the trembling in her legs, ignoring the lingering adrenaline. She walked towards him, past the stunned security, past the remnants of the fight. Her hand, still clutching the silver microphone, reached for his. His large, strong fingers immediately closed around hers, a firm, possessive grip that sent a jolt of certainty through her. His eyes, still holding that fierce, protective intensity, softened almost imperceptibly as they met hers. Together, hand in hand, they walked out of the chaos, out of the shattered dressing room, and onto the brightly lit stage. The roar of the audience, initially confused by the delay, swelled into a wave of thunderous applause as they appeared. Hannah in her emerald gown, Oliver bruised and formidable by her side. The lights were blinding, the energy overwhelming, but Hannah saw only him, felt only the solid, unyielding strength of his hand in hers. She lifted the silver microphone, her gaze sweeping over the millions of faces, then settling firmly on Oliver. Her voice, strong and clear, resonated through the vast arena, carrying over the roar of the crowd, carrying over the shockwaves of the night's violence. "I wrote this song for someone very special," she began, her voice unwavering, a testament to the power he had brought back to her. "For the man I divorced but never stopped loving." Then, the first notes of her new, powerful love song soared through the arena, a defiant, heartbreakingly beautiful melody of unwavering loyalty and devotion. Her voice, once silenced, now soared, irrevocably tethered to his strength, to his unwavering protection, proclaiming their unbreakable bond before the entire world. The world outside the penthouse had been a whirlwind of frenzied headlines and stunned public reaction. Hannah's declaration on live television, her bruised and formidable protector by her side, had captivated millions. The true story, meticulously leaked and managed by Oliver's formidable team, began to emerge. The insidious pressure from his mother, the forged psychiatric reports, his years of silent protection. The public, initially shocked, was slowly won over by the narrative of a love so powerful it defied separation, a man so devoted he waged a hidden war for the woman he adored. Oliver, far from being diminished, emerged from the scandal with a reputation even darker, more formidable, a legend whispered in hushed tones across financial circles and beyond. He was a force of nature, and Hannah was irrevocably linked to his terrifying absolute power. The syndicate, cornered and exposed by Oliver's relentless counter-offensive, had crumbled swiftly. Its leadership was arrested, their operations dismantled with a surgical precision that left no room for recovery. Leo, her once trusted manager, now faced severe charges, his betrayal laid bare for the world to see. Hannah felt a complex mix of relief and lingering grief for the trust shattered, but mostly a profound sense of vindication, knowing Oliver had avenged her. He had burned down their world for daring to touch what was his. Oliver handled the ensuing media storm like a seasoned general, his presence an unyielding wall against the relentless scrutiny. He gave no interviews, offered no personal statements. Instead, his team released carefully curated information, painting a picture of a man who had sacrificed everything, even his reputation, to protect the woman he loved. Hannah watched him, a silent testament to his formidable will, his every action a reinforcement of his absolute control, his unwavering shield. She felt cherished, utterly safe, behind his impenetrable facade. Days later, in the quiet sanctuary of Oliver's private study, the city lights a distant hum outside the soundproofed glass. He summoned her. The air in the room was thick with unspoken emotion, with the weight of everything they had endured. Oliver stood by his large desk, his powerful frame still radiating an intensity that made her instinctively straighten. He held a document in his hand, pristine and white. His eyes, dark and piercing, met hers, holding a profound depth of emotion that softened the hard lines of his face. He didn't speak immediately, letting the silence build, letting the gravity of the moment settle between them. Hannah felt her heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs, her gaze fixed on him, waiting. "Hannah," he finally said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the quiet room, through her very core, demanding her complete attention, her absolute submission. "The first marriage certificate, the one my mother forced me to sign, was torn, a symbol of a broken promise, a painful necessity." He stepped towards her, slowly, deliberately, and the sheer force of his presence seemed to expand, engulfing her, pulling her into his orbit. He stopped directly before her, his height towering, his scent of rich leather and his own unique, masculine power surrounding her. He held out the document. It was a new marriage certificate, fresh, unblemished, legally binding. It wasn't a question of if, but when. His name, Oliver Blackwood, was already printed on it. He was claiming her, not asking. "This one," he continued, his voice dropping to a deeper, more intimate register, a tone laced with a demanding love that bypassed her mind and went straight to her soul, "is a testament to a future forged in fire, to a love that survived the impossible, to your irrevocable place by my side." He didn't ask if she would marry him. He was stating a fact, a truth carved from years of silent devotion and brutal protection. "You are mine, Hannah, completely, forever, not out of obligation, but out of a shared, powerful love that will never break again. This is where you belong, with me, under my protection, my dominance." Hannah felt her breath catch in her throat. His words were not just a proposal. They were a claiming, an absolute declaration of possession, a demand for her complete surrender. The sheer power radiating from him was overwhelming, intoxicating. She looked into his formidable eyes and saw not just a husband, but her protector, her anchor, the man who had fought a war for her, who had rebuilt her world around himself. His dominance, once terrifying, now felt like the very air she breathed, a source of profound, unshakable safety. Her heart swelled with a love so fierce it almost hurt, a love born from pain and fear, forged in the crucible of his unwavering protection. She had no choice. Not because he commanded it, but because her soul recognized its home. Every fiber of her being yearned for the absolute safety, the profound belonging that only he could offer. A smile, radiant and pure, bloomed on her face, pushing away the last shadows of doubt. Her voice, once lost, now strong and clear, a testament to his devotion, resonated with a certainty that matched his own. "Yes," she whispered, her gaze locked with his, her entire being surrendering to the powerful, beautiful truth of their bond. "Yes, Oliver. Always." He didn't smile. Not truly, but a profound satisfaction deepened the lines around his eyes. He lowered the certificate, and his large, powerful hands reached for her, pulling her against his chest, holding her close, possessively. She melted into his embrace, cherished, utterly safe, her heart beating in perfect rhythm with his, finally, irrevocably, exactly where she belonged. Years later, the hum of the state-of-the-art recording studio within Oliver's penthouse was Hannah's constant companion. It was a sanctuary of sound, crafted specifically for her, where the city's roar was muffled to a distant whisper, allowing her voice to soar, pure and unimpeded. Her grand piano, a gleaming black sentinel, stood in the center, its keys worn smooth by countless hours of composition. Her music label, once a pawn in a dangerous game, was now entirely in her name, a testament to her talent and to the formidable man who had ensured her complete artistic freedom. Hannah Sterling, now a global superstar, felt a profound sense of peace settle deep within her as she worked. Her voice, once stolen by trauma, then reclaimed through sheer will, was now a powerful instrument, a melody that resonated with millions. Yet every note, every lyric, was ultimately for him. It was a story of survival, of love, and of the absolute, unwavering protection that had carved out her world. Oliver Blackwood, a legend in the financial world, had only grown more formidable with time. His name was now synonymous with ruthless power, whispered in hushed, reverent tones across boardrooms and shadowed corridors. His reputation, forged in the fires of their past, was darker, almost mythical. He still prowled the financial markets with an intensity that bent the world to his will, but his ultimate focus, his unyielding devotion, remained singularly hers. In the vast expanse of their penthouse, his presence was a constant solid anchor. Hannah found herself instinctively gravitating towards him in the quiet moments, her hand finding his, her body leaning into the protective sphere of his strength. His dominance, once terrifying in its abruptness, was now the very air she breathed, a cherished comfort, an undeniable truth that settled deep in her bones. She moved through her days with a quiet confidence, knowing she was cherished, utterly safe within the impenetrable fortress of his will. At her sold-out concerts around the world, Hannah would step onto the stage, the roar of the crowd a powerful current beneath her feet. She would stand under the blinding lights, her voice filling colossal arenas, connecting with thousands of adoring fans. But amidst the clamor and the adoration, she always knew he was there. He was rarely glimpsed by the crowds, a dark, imposing silhouette in the wings, almost unseen by anyone but her. Yet Hannah would feel his presence, a palpable hum of power that cut through the noise. She would find him, her gaze drawn to that familiar spot, and there he would be, his dark, powerful eyes fixed solely on her. They held a fierce, possessive intensity, an unwavering vigilance that promised absolute protection. In that gaze, she saw the man who had battled shadows for her, who had rebuilt her broken world, who would kill to keep her safe. It was a silent communication, a profound understanding that transcended words. His eyes were her shield, his presence her sanctuary. She was his, utterly and irrevocably, claimed not just by rings and vows, but by the relentless, terrifying force of his love and devotion. Her voice, once a fragile whisper, now soared, a testament to his strength, an eternal melody sung always for him, the man who had brought it back to life, and who would forever protect it with his formidable, unyielding will. If you enjoyed this story, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to Tales of Power and Desire to keep up with our intense romances.